So for today, we are going to talk about color theory. We are going to talk about how it applies to our lives as artists and also what it looks like in the real world, because color theory is all around us. So we have a worksheet and it looks basically just like this. And you are going to fill out the definitions as I give them to you in this video. The next thing you will do is create some of these color schemes yourself. So on this document, we have here my explanation of how color theory works. So physical and psychological nature of color is essentially what color theory is. It's how you feel when you see a color. It's how you feel when you see colors together. It's how you want to make the viewer feel when you make certain color choices in your artwork. So there are essentially three brackets of color theory. There's color wheel, color value, and color schemes. And our color wheel is what we're going to talk about first. Color wheels are everywhere in the art room. There are at least 3 in the middle school classroom. And color schemes are what we are going to focus on specifically with our unit that's coming up. And those are used to create visual interest, differentiate elements, and convey a certain mood or atmosphere. Now, this is an example of a psychological nature of color, in being that those two center rectangles are actually the exact same color. They are the exact same shade, they did not change them. However, because they have different backgrounds behind each of them, they appear to be different. So the one on the left appears to be warmer toned, and the one on the right appears to be cooler toned. And that is simply the case because they have that opposite effect in the backgrounds. So that one on the left has that lavender, that cool tone, so the box in the middle becomes warmer as a way of contrast. Same deal on the right. Now, color needs context, but it has meaning. So color is a phenomenon between our brains and physical wavelengths of light that are being absorbed and reflected off of surfaces. So essentially, scientists have been studying color theory and the way that wavelengths of light are perceived by the human eye for a long time. They're still discovering more things about it, and we could get more into that, but we're going to just cover what it looks like in our lives as artists. So colors generally have some feeling associated with them. When we think about the color red, you might think love, you might think energy, excitement, strength, but you might also think anger. If we consider the film Inside Out, the emotion of anger is actually red. And that is typical for how we feel when we are angry. Our faces get red. So color has real world context that allows us to have those associations. So for example, red might have the association of love due to the fact that roses are red. You could also consider red has that angry ability because of the color our faces turn, or maybe you could even say the color of blood. When we think about the color yellow, we think about Joy, the character in Inside Out, who is very happy, who has that cheer. And yellow comes from the sun, comes from different areas where it's very bright and we have that positive, joyful association. Green, excellent example of being a natural color, color of grass, color of leaves, makes you feel fresh, makes you feel maybe humbled. These are different things that you feel when you see these colors. Now, Picasso actually had an entire, what he called, blue period. So the words that are underneath this particular section says that blue means trust, peace, loyalty, and competence. However, a lot of times you would probably say that blue is the association with sad. Someone says, I'm blue. What that means is when it's dark outside, when it's raining, water, these are all different things that we see in the real world that gives us that connotation of it being sad or peaceful. Now, the color wheel, this is where we're going to start taking notes. The color wheel is all about separating the primary colors, secondary colors, and tertiary colors, and developing and creating our own way of perceiving that and our own way of utilizing that through color value and color harmonies. So, our primary colors, and all I want you to write down for this, are red, yellow, and blue. So, underneath primary colors in your notes, red, yellow, and blue. When you combine two primary colors, you combine red and yellow, for example, you would get orange. Now, orange is a secondary color. It's the first level from the family tree that primary colors create. So primary colors create every color that's in the color wheel. You combine them together and you can develop everything else. So if I took a primary color like yellow and I combined it with blue, if we're mixing paint, we are going to get the color green. If we combine red and yellow, we're going to get orange, etc. Then, when we have those secondary colors, so a secondary color like orange or green, if you mix a primary color and a secondary color together, you get the third branch of the family tree, which is a tertiary color. So if I combine a primary color and a secondary color, it becomes tertiary. For example, if I combined red and I combined orange, I would get red-orange. Okay, so that's that kind of orange shade. That's a little bit more red, maybe more like a tangerine or a grapefruit. So, underneath secondary colors, I want you to write an example. So you could write red plus yellow equals orange, but you also need to write primary plus primary equals a secondary. Then for tertiary colors, primary plus secondary equals tertiary. And I want you to also include underneath tertiary an example of such. So you could say red plus orange equals red-orange. Now, a hue, that's in that first section still, is a pure color without white or black. So if we refer back to this color wheel, any of the colors on that very outer edge, those are our hues, H-U-E, hue. So underneath hue, I just want you to write pure color without white or black. Now we're moving on to the next stage of our notes. So color value. Right here, we have a good example of a color wheel that has been changed in terms of its value. So if we consider shading a color, so shading, underneath shade, I just want you to write adding black. So if I took a red and I added black to that red, I'm going to get that kind of deeper maroon color, as you can kind of see in the center. If I took that red and I added gray, that becomes a tone. So it's not going to be quite as saturated, not going to be quite as intense, and it kind of dials back on the hue. So a shade is adding black, tone is adding gray. If we want to lighten a color, either because we are trying to make it less intense or just to lighten the value overall, we would tint it. So we would add white. So if I'm shading something, it's getting darker. If I am toning something, I am reducing its intensity. And if I am tinting something, I am lightening that color. So in tinting, I make sure that you write adding white, tone, adding gray, shade, adding black. These are some really good examples of what it might look like to take a singular color, tint it, tone it, and shade it in a bunch of different ways. So from the left to the right, they added more and more white, gray, and black. So that first row, they added white, and by the end, it was almost a pure white color. In the middle, they toned it, and by the end, it was about a gray. Same thing for the shade. By the end, it became black. So the more you add to it, the darker, lighter, or less saturated it becomes. So it becomes less and less of its pure color of its original hue. Now, color has temperature, so make sure that you have underneath color value. For temperature, I just want you to write warm and cool, and some examples of each. So what we have here is the color wheel split in half. On the left, we have our cool colors, okay? They are associated as such purely because in real world scenarios, temperature in the Arctic, if you were to draw snow, if you were to draw the ocean, something that's colder is usually blues, violets, okay? When we have a warm color, it means when you think about the Arizona deserts, when you think about the sky on a sunny day, those are all things that have a warmer temperature. Now, green is split in the middle because a green can be cool or warm. Same with all colors. Blues can be more cool or more warm depending on what you add to it. So that top blue on the right has a little bit more of a cooler feel than the one right below it because the one right below it looks a bit more purple. And purple is a little bit of a warmer color compared to the original blue. So things can have a cooler or a warmer connotation to it. But all I want you to write in your notes is that colors can be cool, colors can be warm. So maybe for a cool color, you would write blue. For a warm color, you would write red. Now, neutrals is somewhere in the middle. Neutrals generally do not have a very strong temperature. However, things like beiges, browns, tans can have a little bit of a warm, cool, or no temperature quality. Mixing that in with something else can affect how our color, our original hue, is appearing. Now, we are at the last section of our notes. So we are in color schemes and harmonies, and this is going to be the bulk of your notes. You do not need to write down everything on this slide, but a monochromatic hue looks something like this, okay? So color schemes, as I mentioned before, are various harmonies that are created when you put colors side by side. So a monochromatic color scheme, mono means one, chroma is color. So when we have one color, it's one color that has been tinted, shaded, and toned. So in this example on the right, the color blue has added white and black to it. When that happens, there are so many variations of blue that now it becomes an entire color scheme where you could use any of the colors within this wheel and apply that, and it would still be a part of our color scheme. This is a good example of a monochromatic color scheme. So underneath monochromatic, I just want you to write one color that has been tinted and shaded. So underneath monochromatic, one color that has been tinted or shaded. So monochromatic comes from one color, but all of the things it produces end up becoming a large range of color. So here we have very, very dark indigo blues. We have very, very light white blues. We have all of these different variations of that same hue because of our color value shifting from whites, blacks, and having area in between. This is another example of a monochromatic color scheme. However, this one used the base color of purple. And we have very, very dark versions of this purple, and we have very light versions of this purple. And there's a very good range that indicates a change in how much white or how much black was used. Monochromatic color schemes can also apply to something that is neutral in tone. So this one is just different shades of black and white. The next color scheme we have on here is an analogous color scheme. An analogous color scheme is when we have multiple colors next to each other on the color wheel. So underneath analogous, I want you to write 3 plus colors sitting next to each other. So for example, yellow, yellow, orange, and orange are all sitting right next to each other on the color wheel. That would make it an analogous color scheme. Imagine that the color wheel is a piece of pizza, and we cut that pizza into slices. Whatever section of the color wheel we cut into a slice, anything that's next to it would be a part of that analogous color scheme. So it's usually at least 3 colors that are next to each other. The ones on the far right are examples with at least 5, 4, and other variations. You could even split half the color wheel and say that that was an analogous color scheme. But ultimately, anything that is next to each other is an analogous color scheme. This is an example of what an analogous color scheme would look like. We have colors that are next to each other on this color wheel that we implemented into one finished piece. This is an example. Maybe they used a blue-green, a green, a blue, and a blue-purple. That is an example of a good color scheme. It's more like what we see right here. This is another example of an analogous color scheme where Van Gogh uses yellow, yellow-green, and green in this composition. Complementary might be one that you're already aware of. Complementary colors are found a lot of times in mascots, teams, and ways to market yourself because complementary colors have a perfect relationship to each other. When we think about green and red, we usually think about Christmas and the colors that go with that. If we think about orange and blue and you like football, you might think about Dolphins or the Broncos. When we think about yellow and purple, you might think about the Vikings. Because that has such an even tone, they are directly across from each other on the color wheel, creating a perfectly complementary relationship. On both sides, it is very positive and they bring out the best in each other. So colors on the opposite side of the color wheel psychologically make each other appear more intense, and they are a little bit more pleasing to look at. However, if we mixed these colors together, it's going to make a brown because they're on opposite sides of the color wheel. So we never want to mix them together, but they look great side by side. This is an example of 3 different complementary color schemes that were used. So we have green and red, orange and blue, yellow and purple. This is that orange and blue color scheme using darker blues and darker oranges. So more of a red-orange and a blue-violet color scheme. This painting by Monet has different colors within it, but different values of orange and different values of blue, but ultimately this is a complementary color scheme utilizing those 2 that are across from each other on the color wheel. A split complementary color scheme, underneath a split complementary color scheme, I just want you to write the letter Y, just the letter Y. The best way to understand this is if you take a complementary color scheme, so ones we just talked about that are right across from each other on the color wheel, so underneath complementary color schemes, make sure you have written across from each other on the color wheel, and that's only 2 colors. A split complementary color scheme implements 3 colors that are being used together. So you start with a complement, so red and green. However, in a split complementary color scheme, that red goes across, finds the color green, and then splits. So now the color scheme we have would be red, yellow-green, and blue-green. So it's creating that Y using the color wheel. So taking one color, finding its complement, not using that complement, but using the two colors that are on the immediate sides of it. You could also think about it as pick a color, skip the one right next to it, find that color at the end, and then see where that meets in a diagonal line. But I just want you to write the letter Y. This is a real world example of a split complementary color scheme with that blue, red, and yellow, orange. In this scenario, we have purple, yellow, green, and yellow or yellow, orange. Triadic. Underneath triadic, I want you to draw a triangle, and I want you to write the number 3. So a triadic color scheme is anything where you lay a perfect equilateral triangle on top of a color wheel. When you do this, you get 3 colors at each of the vertices of that triangle that are going to serve as your color scheme. So it could be red, yellow, and blue, or purple, orange, and green, or any other variation that you can find. If you recognize those, that's because those are our primary and secondary colors. So primary color scheme is in fact triadic. Secondary color is also triadic. These are some Da Vinci paintings that are triadic color schemes. This is an example of that same concept where we're taking those primary colors and that becomes a color scheme. So that red, yellow, and blue. The next one is tetradic. For tetradic, write the letter X and draw a little rectangle. So in your notes underneath tetradic, write the letter X, draw a rectangle. Reason I had you do that is if you were to draw an X, find 2 complements that are on the color wheel. So green and red, that makes 1 complement. Orange and blue, that makes a 2nd complement. So if we take those 2 and we make an X, that's where we find our tetradic color scheme. So what you want to make sure is you are finding a complement, so 2 colors that are across from each other on the color wheel, skipping the complement that's exactly next to it, and then picking the one that is in between. So for example, blue and red or blue and orange would be a complement. Blue, green, and red, orange would not fit with that same tetradic color scheme. You need to make sure that you skip one of the complementary color schemes to make that X or that rectangle. This is a good example of that blue being used, that orange being used in that complement, and red and green being used. So this is a good tetradic color scheme. So, in review, in your notes, you should have all of the definitions to these. If you missed a few, we can talk about it when I get back next week. But hopefully you are able to fill out as much of this as you can. Now, what you are going to do, if with the rest of class, there are colored pencils in the back of the room. You will use those and the second worksheet to create color schemes on your own. So what you're going to have is different color schemes with color painted, drawn into those boxes to demonstrate that you understand those color schemes. So for the monochromatic one, you would do one color, you would get a black, you would get a white, and you would darken it to prove that you know how to do monochromatic. For complementary, you would split that circle in half. Maybe you would do half of it red and half of it green. So you're creating different color schemes on that piece of paper. That will take you to the end of class.